So today, in another video that I'm making to help with getting over my public speaking issues, the topic will be about the movie Splash. The year 1984. There are cats in the background. One particular annoying one keeps whining because he wants fed, and I won't feed him till 7 o'clock. And now he's picking a fight with the cat that hates every other cat in the house. So that's happening right now. So why am I talking about the movie Splash? Well, for one, I love this film. I'm still not entirely sure my parents should have let me watch it when I was little, looking back now, especially considering some of the scenes in it. But it wasn't anything that was overly graphic, wasn't anything that was over the top. It was just, there are things in there that maybe little me should not have seen. Granted, the original version I would watch as a kid was taped off of TV, so some of those bits were cut in the taped version that we'd watch when I was little. So maybe that's why it was okay for me to watch it, because there are things in the versions I've watched now, and I've bought it on DVD, and then I bought it digitally when I couldn't find my DVD. It's not been released on Blu-ray. I don't remember, but are there definitely. It's a PG-13 for a reason. That's all more I'll say. It was made in 1984. It was the first film released under the Touchstone label of the Walt Disney Company, because it was a risk, and Disney at the time was a bit down and out, because the 80s was Disney's dark age, as many Disney fans well know. It starred at the time unknown Tom Hanks alongside Daryl Hannah, and it's a romantic comedy about a young man who falls in love with a mermaid. That is the whole premise. It's a rom-com, though, taking place in 1984 New York, which is something to keep in mind because the film hasn't been altered since 1984, which I can admire a little bit, but they started with 20 years ago, which is actually 1964, and then go to today, which is actually 1984. So if you go seek this film out, and I do recommend it, keep in mind that the today of the film is the year 1984. What's interesting to me is this film had an $11 million budget. Doesn't quite look it, but they also used practical effects, and they also kept the effects to a minimum. And it kept things simple. Apparently, at the time, there was supposed to be another mermaid film in competition with Splash, and it was supposed to star Warren Beatty, who I think was a big deal at the time. This is me being kind of oblivious on purpose, as I don't care about Warren Beatty. But apparently, it was supposed to be a mermaid film starring Warren Beatty in the male lead, being produced by Warner Brothers, and something or other happened, and that movie just fizzled and never met the light of day, never was produced. So Splash came out, and that movie did not even get started being filmed. Like, there's no even title for it. So, I was looking up something about that, and happened to notice that there was a review by a certain infamous, and to me he is infamous, critic, Rodger Ebert. He panned this movie. I don't know why. Perhaps because, like all critics, he hates joy and hates fun. But it was something I saw from his review that was quoted that ticked me off, really. And that was, he thought that John Candy, the more well-known star, should have been the lead, and that Tom Hanks should have been the brother character. I mean, yes, this was a romantic comedy, but John Candy would have been wrong for the role. I'm not saying this because of John Candy's physicality. I think John Candy would have been fine as a romantic lead in a different film. But the way the characters were written, the straight-laced but somewhat sardonically funny at times Alan would not have been a good fit for John Candy, who brought a whole huge sense of life to the character of Freddy, whose whole defining thing was he's a carefree man-child, and yet is the older brother of the pair, and has a love of life and love of love. And very few ideas on what it is to be responsible for anything, including himself. He even describes himself as a free spirit at one point in the film. So the basic plot being the character of Alan falls in love with a mermaid, and shenanigans go from there. And I'm not going to spoil it, even though this film is 37 years old. I'm not going to spoil it because I think it's still worth watching, especially considering Disney would later rip themselves off with some of the shots of Splash and some of the shots from the film that kicked off the Disney Renaissance, The Little Mermaid. And I'm jokingly saying that they ripped themselves off because it's just where they filmed certain scenes of Splash is also, I think, where they drew inspiration for background scenery of Little Mermaid. So it may not have been intentional that they recreated some of the shots they did in Splash in Little Mermaid 5 years later. Well, not even quite 5 years later, this was animated, so it could have only been a couple years later. Anyway, particle. The character of Freddy is the older brother of the two. And it seems like Alan's the one who had to step up after they took over the family business. And this is played out throughout over and over again in the film, where Freddy's just shown to be the immature, irresponsible one. Until a point, at the lowest point of the film, end of Act 2, bad stuff has happened. Alan's being a mope. And it's a romantic comedy, so it's a mope and separated from the love interest. And there's a line that Freddy says in response to Alan being a mope that would not have been as powerful had it been Tom Hanks being the irresponsible brother character to John Candy's character. Because, again, I knew of John Candy as always being the funny guy in other films I'd seen as a kid, because my parents would watch a lot of stuff they taped, and I'd watch a lot of older films as a kid, because we had a VCR and lots of tapes. So, even as a little kid, I knew that John Candy was the funny man, the one that was always there to be the one to lighten the mood. So when this character, being played by a guy I knew to be a funny man, got serious and says this one line to his brother to kick him in the pants, so to speak, I will never be that happy. In reference to how happy the character of Alan was with the mermaid. It's powerful, because it's coming from a character that had been carefree, careless the whole film. And suddenly, when the chips are down and he's serious, it's impactful. And John Candy, being John Candy, brought extra to that role because, again, if most of his library of work, if you watch a lot of John Candy stuff, which I've seen a fair amount, he's the fun guy. He's the funny guy. So to see him be serious strikes even harder. So, no, John Candy should not have been the romantic lead in this film. John Candy was perfect as he was because even though he was the funny guy for almost the whole entire film, because even after this one moment where he's serious, he goes back to being the funny guy, makes the serious moment that character hit harder. So, this is basically a long story, a long way of me basically telling Rodger Ebert a hack years after he's been gone, which I suppose isn't nice, but I only just found out about the whole thing in the first place, so it's just why this matters to me. First of all, again, I love this film. Secondly, it shows the power of casting with type, but making sure the character you write for the person has enough depth for them to flesh out and has enough impact on the plot. They aren't just there to be funny. That this character actually matters in the end of the plot. Could have been easy for the character of Freddy to be the pervy, man-child, older brother being taken care of by the little brother character with nothing more. But this shows that Freddy cares about Alan. Freddy cares about stuff, and that Freddy is self-aware. That there is something more to him than just his childish exterior. So no, Rodger Ebert. John Candy was perfectly cast, and just because Tom Hanks, who was at the time unknown, was an unknown, doesn't mean that he should not have been the lead. as we can see from the future looking back through time, Tom Hanks definitely has grown a lot as an actor, but this was still one of his stronger earlier roles. And I think that we would have been deprived of a very good film had they not gone with the unknown Tom Hanks at the time. Because, again, I watched a behind the scenes featurette, and that's how I know that they even mentioned that they used Touchstone to protect the Disney brand name, and they used that for a more risky film like Splash. So it was the first one released under that label. But they also mentioned how when they were filming it, Tom Hanks was trying to keep up with the funny guys like Eugene Levy and John Candy, and they said, no. Film will work better if you just love the girl. Love the girl. And they were right. Because that earnest love the two main characters have for each other does help carry the film. So, long story short, Splash is an underrated film that I think needs a little more love and would love to see a Blu-ray release of.